Well, welcome everyone to the 2024 Civic Thought and Leadership Initiatives Civic Educators Conference. My name is Robert Burton, and I direct the Civic Thought and Leadership Initiative within the Center for Constitutional Studies here at Utah Valley University. It's my privilege to welcome you for a number of reasons. One is because we just love teachers. We love to work with you, we love to learn from you and with you, and we're so grateful for all that you do in preparing the next generations of citizens and civic leaders. Our purpose as the Civic Thought and Leadership Initiative is to partner with you and others in developing the next generation of citizens and civic leaders with the knowledge, skills, dispositions, and virtues necessary for a just, free, and flourishing constitutional republic. And there's nothing better that we could focus our time on than that wonderful document, the Declaration of Independence, that captures some of those important concepts and principles. In particular, this is the start of a 2-year celebration and study of the Declaration of Independence as we prepare for the 250th anniversary of 1776. And so that includes a number of things. It includes this event, our Civic Educators Conference, which is a 2-part series. So this year we're focused on the Declaration and its fundamental principles of natural rights and civic virtue. Next year, the same conference will be part 2, in which we show the impact of the Declaration of Independence and its relevancy for today throughout American history. So this is part 1. I expect you all to come back for part 2. We'd love to have you and invite you to bring all your colleagues and friends. This also is the first event of the Utah America 250 Commission's events as a state to try and celebrate and commemorate the 250th anniversary of the Declaration. We thank Utah's America 250 Commission. We'll be hearing from some of them from their executive director a little bit later. Before we begin in earnest, we've invited Robert Austin, who's the Director of Humanities for the State Board of Education, to share a few thoughts with us. Robert, if you wouldn't mind joining me up here, appreciate that. Thank you. Please join me in welcoming Robert Austin.
Thank you. I have 4 minutes. I set a timer, I promise. Okay. You know, social studies educators, we can talk. So I'm Robert Austin. I'm the Humanities Coordinator at the State Board of Ed. Some of you may have gotten an email from me over the years. This is what I look like when I'm not in a cubicle, when I'm out in the wild with you, with real people. I could start with the first cliche. I actually have 3 cliches. Here's the first cliche. The first cliche is you guys are awesome, but we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about that. We already know that. You wrote sub-plans, for crying out loud, to be here. And you're here because you're committed to your professional career and you're committed to students. And so for that, you all deserve a round of applause. But we're not going to take any time because I've only got 4 minutes. But I firmly believe that, and I can see the faces of people who I've interacted with over the years who just at your very core are deeply, firmly committed to the concept of the republic and to ensuring that students claim the life that is afforded to them by living in this incredible experiment called America. The second cliche is this. So I got 1 cliche, I got 2 more. Here's the next cliche. If you're gonna talk the talk, there you go. If you're going to talk the talk, walk the walk. I think it's backwards. We have got to be talking the talk in our classrooms. And too many of us are shying away from it. At the moment when we need to be engaging in deliberative discourse with our students about the issues of the day, we're shy. We're walking on eggshells. We can't do that. We owe it to our students to engage in the kinds of conversations that will help them navigate what it means to live in this country. So you engage in Socratic seminars, you engage in the kinds of robust classroom discussions and debates, structured academic controversies that really feed into their need for community. We just had Senate Youth competition. We had 40-some of the brightest kids across the state attend a competition, and one of the things that we asked them to do is write an essay about the current pressing issue that they're facing in this country. And if they were to advise the incoming administration, what would that issue be? Is it going to be climate change? Because we've got flooding in North Carolina and we've got drought in Utah as this lake dries up. Nope. The number one issue for well over half of those students was their incredible deep concern with the polarization in this country. They are absolutely flummoxed by polarization. How do we get around that? We get around it by engaging in conversations, first and foremost, in our classrooms. We model and talk the talk, and we ask big questions. 7 years ago, Lincoln was asking that question in 1863 of how is it that a nation predicated on this concept of by the people and for the people and of the people, how are we going to survive? How are we going to figure this out? And that question is just as germane in 1863, in 1963, and today. So it's perfect that we are celebrating 250 years of this declaration, and therefore, we've got to talk the talk. The third cliche, because I'm over time, it's going to be really fast. Follow the money. The other issue that we don't spend enough time with in our schools is helping kids understand that there are economic reasons why so many of the issues of our day are intractable. And we avoid some of those conversations at our peril. We've got to be able to engage students in conversations, in deliberative discourse that includes follow the money, figure out who's making money on vouchers, who's making money on whether we help the Great Salt Lake or not, who's making money on all of the kinds of decisions that we're going to face as a country. These students are going to claim their future in this great republic. We have to give them those skills. So follow the money and talk the talk and enjoy your conference. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Robert. We appreciate all the support you give to civic educators in our state. It's my opportunity now actually just before that, a little bit about the format for today. We're going to have two sessions, one focused on the concept of natural rights in the Declaration, one focused on the concept of civic virtue in the Declaration of Independence. We've brought in some wonderful experts on these topics, scholars and thinkers, who will go ahead and present. They'll run some Q&A, and then after that period, we'll have some time for you to workshop at your tables. So there are some of our Robertson Fellows, some master teachers who are affiliated with the Civic Thought and Leadership Initiative, who will be helping run each table, so you'll get instructions from them, but they'll kind of be theory and then hands-on, how do we do this? And then theory and ideas, and then how do we do this in practice? And so that's kind of the format for today. We then have lunch, after which we'll have our primary source discussion and a final resource workshop. So that's a bit of just the flow for how things will work today as we go ahead and get started. Here in the Civic Thought and Leadership Initiative, we have an undergraduate fellowship program called the Tocqueville Fellowship. This gives an opportunity for students from a wide variety of majors and backgrounds, but who are interested in becoming better citizens and civic leaders. And so they help us organize and run our events. They participate in discussions over dinner in faculty's homes, and they're pretty much awesome. So it's my privilege to introduce one of our Tocqueville Fellows, who will then introduce our first speaker, Professor McNamara. Handon Torsak is a Tocqueville Fellow with the Civic Thought and Leadership Initiative. He is majoring in political science. He's a senior, and he also is a senior researcher for the Federalism Index, another project of the Center for Constitutional Studies. And finally, he's a member of the Utah National Guard. Please join me in welcoming Handon Torsak.
Dr. Carol McNamara is currently the director of the Great Hearts Institute for Classical Education and previously served as senior director at the Center of Constitutional Design at the Sandra Day O'Connor College of Law at Arizona State University. Before joining the law school, she served as the inaugural associate director for public programs for the School of Civic and Economic Thought and Leadership, also at Arizona State University, and is one of the founding directors of the Governor Olene Walker Institute of Politics and Public Service at Weber State University here in Utah. In each of these roles, Dr. McNamara created programming and events that invited the university and broader community to engage in conversations about the most pressing issues confronting us today on American campuses and across American society. Dr. McNamara holds a PhD in politics from Boston College. She has taught classical political philosophy, politics, literature. Her teaching and research focuses on politics and literature and ancient Greek political thought. Her publications include pieces on Shakespeare's politics, Xenophon's Socrates, civic education, and the thought of Tom Wolfe. She has also edited volumes on renewing America's civic compact, free speech and intellectual design in higher education, citizenship and civic leadership in America, and the Obama presidency in the constitutional order. So without any further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Carol McNamara.
Thank you for that lovely introduction. It's always wonderful for me to be back in Utah, having spent the vast majority of my academic career at Utah universities, at Utah State and at Weber State University. So I love coming back here. And I want to thank Robert Burton and the Civic Thought and Leadership Initiative at the Center for Constitutional Studies for inviting me and giving me that opportunity to return to Utah and to address you on the eve, although it's the morning, of the semi-quincentennial. I just like the opportunity to say that word, but from now on I'm just going to say the 250th anniversary of the Declaration, if that's okay with you. As the director of the Great Hearts Institute for Classical Education, I'm just going to take one small opportunity to plug the Great Hearts National Symposium for Classical Education. I invite all of you to consider asking your school leaders and principals and so on to allow you to come and join us at Symposium, where we spend 2 days talking about education, talking about original documents. This year, our theme is Cultivating Wonder. There are cards outside that you can get for information and even a QR code. And I hope that you'll join us. Next year, we too will be addressing, in 2026, we'll be addressing the Declaration of Independence at 250. But this year we're going to talk about cultivating wonder, which for us, I think for all of us, I think is the original, the origin of education, the place we begin to educate students. So ask me about that, please. Okay, today Professor Burton asked me to talk about the Declaration and natural rights. So there's no title there, but that's what I'm going to talk about. Thank you. So let me begin by saying that The fundamental question with which we should begin our conversation is, why do we continue to venerate the Declaration of Independence in a most singular manner? And in fact, I would argue it's chief among our founding documents. On the most basic level, of course, it's the document that declares American independence from Great Britain. That is, it marks the birthday of America as an independent country, which we commemorate each year with great national fanfare, picnics, parties, concerts, fireworks. But we also gather on campuses like this one to recite out loud and study together the Declaration of Independence. Why do we do that? And why will we devote an entire year to celebrating the 200, or at UVU 2 years, to celebrating the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence with conferences and events like this one? I think we have to talk about Thomas Jefferson at the very beginning of this conversation, because we owe a lot to him with regard to the shape and form of the Declaration. So it has a great deal to do with Thomas Jefferson. Very near the end of his life, July 4th, 1826, which was July 4th, 1826, Thomas Jefferson famously defended his authorship of the Declaration against the accusation that he had borrowed liberally from philosophic sources, mostly John Locke's Second Treatise of Government, as we all know, in his composition of the Declaration, and that at best he was a mere scribe compiling the thoughts of the larger drafting committee. Jefferson asserted that though he did not consult any texts directly, he had them all in his head. He didn't have to consult them while writing. It was not his intention to be original. And just bear with me while I read what he wrote. This was, quote, the object of the Declaration of Independence, not to find out new principles or new arguments never before thought of, not merely to say things which had never been said before, but to place before mankind and the common sense of the subject, neither aiming at originality of principle or sentiment, nor yet copied from any particular and previous writing. It was intended to be an expression of the American mind, the Declaration of Independence. Professor Michael Zuckert, commenting on Jefferson's explanation of his intention, explains that the attacks on Jefferson's authorship likely had their source in resentment and envy at the elevated status authorship of the Declaration conferred on Jefferson's illustrious pen, because it had become, quote, the most authoritative statement of our rights and the acts of the British government contravening those rights at the time of the Revolution, and, of course, the most lucid statement of the philosophy that had come to be the American creed. Zucker reminds us that the Declaration expresses the principles and ideas which form our mutual bond as Americans, and that while it is certainly known for its content, it is also celebrated for the elegance and economy with which Jefferson composed this statement of the American mind. Excuse me. Zuckert's reference to economy of language cannot but remind us of likely the most famous and important historical reference to the Declaration in Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, which has already been mentioned once this morning, a document also iconic for its brevity, its purpose, and its recollection of the Declaration. Lincoln evokes the Declaration and renews its enduring relevance to the American experience at Gettysburg when he reminds Americans what they are fighting for during the Civil War, that, quote, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Lincoln concludes at Gettysburg with the solemn resolve to renew the promise of the Declaration that, quote, this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. Lincoln thus recalls the original purpose of the Declaration as the primary source of political wisdom and expression of our unifying principles. Lincoln focuses our attention on our natural rights. The United States was conceived in liberty and dedicated to the idea that we are all created equal, which together creates our natural right to determine who will exercise sovereignty, the deprivation of which is at the foundation of our revolutionary defiance against Great Britain. But what are natural rights? What makes liberty and equality natural? What is their source and what makes them self-evidently true? Let's start with the text of the Declaration. The Declaration of Independence has a clear, well-ordered argument, not a bad model, by the way, for students to follow. It's actually a really neat example to use if you want to show them what the structure of a really good essay is. And again, I'm indebted to Michael Zuckert for this clear observation. Excuse me. It begins with an assertion or statement of purpose, after which Jefferson establishes the structure of a kind of syllogism with a major premise. If this is true, then this also must be true, which is the theoretical explanation in the second paragraph and justification supporting the statement of purpose and action, excuse me, with which he begins. Then he turns in the minor premise to the minor premise, which comprises the list of grievances against King George III, which we often don't spend much time on, and we won't spend much time on it today either, but I'm happy to talk about it. And finally, Jefferson concludes, or ends with a conclusion that follows clearly from the evidence mustered to make the case that the British government, king, and parliament, to which the American colonists had once tacitly consented, is no longer serving the sole purpose for which it was created, the protection of their natural rights, and hence has become tyrannical and no longer deserves their support. The structure of the Declaration is clear, but the meaning of the words, excuse me, the meaning of the words has become, is frequently debated. So let's offer our entry into that debate. Excuse me, I'm sorry, it's the morning, so my voice is still a little rough. In the opening, I'm going to begin, I'm basically just going to take you through the initial two paragraphs of the Declaration. In the opening paragraph of the Declaration, Jefferson situates the American colonies in the context of human history. Why begin small, right? The course of human events. That's the context for the Declaration of Independence. So I think it's important for us to see that Jefferson understood the Declaration and the actions of the American colonies as world historical. In doing this, he provides a standard for the United States that applies to the whole of humanity. Thank you. Sorry about that. That applies to the whole of humanity. Until this point, Until this point, the colonies have been voluntary subjects of a political society governed by Great Britain. But on July 4th, 1776, the Americans are announcing and giving notice to Great Britain and to the entire world. I think Jefferson wants to emphasize that. They're telling Great Britain, we're leaving, but they're also announcing it to the whole world to provide a standard for human governance for that world. And to explain why they're severing the connection to Great Britain and assuming as a nation state, as a separate nation state, their separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitle them. The Americans are not content, however, merely to assert independence. Jefferson's fundamental point here is that the Americans deny that the King of England has any divine right, meaning a power given to him by God to rule over the American colonies in perpetuity. Instead, their argument is that every individual and group of human beings, who forms a political society has a natural right to withdraw consent to be governed by any particular community, and that there is a different, natural, and universal, again, not divine, standard that in fact governs nations And then we'll get to the individuals in the next paragraph. What Jefferson, and that standard is the laws of nature and nature's God that governs the formation of political societies. Under this natural and rational standard, the Americans have this natural right to withdraw and then redirect their political consent to establish a new political society. In addition, the American declaration of their intention to end their association with Great Britain in this world historical manner will include a catalog of the causes compelling that separation. And I should add that just as the United States would be a new kind of nation, even though Jefferson says that he's expressing principles and ideas that already exist, this is the first practical application of those ideas in the world. It's world historical. But he also does, and there's also something innovative and novel about the intention to announce to the world this act of independence and separation. Lots of countries had separated from their father, mother countries, whatever. But this is the first time that a country has announced in a declaration to the whole world its intention to separate and its reasons for separating in a formal, sort of rhetorically important document. Okay. I'm going to take you through the second paragraph, which really forms the bulk of my talk. It's amazing how much you can say about the second paragraph. The second paragraph of the Declaration contains the theoretical justification for separation that Jefferson references above. And of course, the discussion of natural rights more fully, especially as applied to individuals, but also to the country as a whole. The Declaration asserts a standard for political rule and consent to be governed that is essentially pre-political. It is based neither on divine right or tradition, but upon what Jefferson argues is the natural condition of human beings as equal and free creatures. Excuse me. This philosophic account of the human condition is, again, not entirely novel to those who study ideas, those who had written about and studied ideas, but it is novel as applied to the practical world of politics. Hence, it requires a full and serious explanation, which is what Jefferson endeavors to do. This paragraph is among the most famous statements among mankind, and it will be the focus of our attention. Let's approach the discussion. I'm going to approach the discussion of the paragraph in the following order. First, we'll talk about self-evident truths. Second, what does it mean to say that all human beings, all men/human beings, are created equal? Jefferson asserts that so that's the second point. The third point that I'll turn to is Jefferson asserts that human beings are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. What are these natural rights? What does it mean to say that they are inalienable? What does that mean? It's not clear, and it's not clear. It's still the subject of a lot of discussion. And then fourth, we'll look at the purpose of government that Jefferson asserts. That is, that the purpose of government is to secure and protect these natural rights, and that when a government to which the people have consented for that purpose, quote, becomes destructive of those ends, the people have a natural right to abolish it. In other words, Jefferson is asserting a right to revolution among those natural rights that he discusses at the beginning of the paragraph. Okay, so the first, my Declaration of Independence comes from I was going to say competing, but a parallel program. So I know that you all have a copy of the Declaration, which is, I think, at the back, I think it might be on the second to last page of your little book. At the beginning of the second paragraph, Jefferson says, "We hold these truths to be self-evident," which is one of the, it's one of those sentences that makes you stop. There are truths and they're self-evident. Many have questioned whether the truths that Jefferson is about to assert are self-evident, and I invite you to explore those scholarly debates. But for our purposes, I think we'll just try to decipher what Jefferson might mean, or what we think Jefferson might mean by self-evident. Again, Michael Zuckert is helpful on this point. Thomas Jefferson, I think, essentially provides three explanations for what he means when he says that these truths are self-evident. And again, there's endless volumes of debate about what this means. I'm just going to give you what I have time to give you in my time allowed this morning. First of all, I want to take you back to the letter to Henry Lee that we quoted above, where Jefferson explained his purpose in drafting the Declaration. Jefferson argues that he's not endeavoring to assert, quote, new principles or new arguments, but, quote, to place before mankind the common sense of the subject in terms so plain and firm as to command their assent. Here, Jefferson explains that because the Declaration was a public and world historical document with very practical implications, his goal was to make the principles of the Declaration rhetorically clear and obvious to all. So on one level, Jefferson's intention, his public rhetorical intention, is to make the principles of the Declaration rhetorically clear and obvious to all. I think that's the first sort of public level for explaining what he means by self-evident truths. But it's Thomas Jefferson, so we just can't stay there. Secondly, Jefferson also provides what one might say is a higher or more theoretical Enlightenment explanation of what self-evident truths are in a statement from the last letter of his life, when he had to regretfully decline an invitation to join a 50th anniversary celebration of the Declaration of Independence in Washington, D.C. in 1826. That's a kind of when I was preparing my remarks, I was struck again by the fact that Jefferson lived 50 years after his composition of the Declaration of Independence. That's an amazing lifespan, and we, of course, I'm not going to recount everything he did, but it's an amazing time that he had to see the implementation and the importance of the Declaration in our national imagination. Jefferson said in this letter, "May it be to the world," and it is the Declaration of Independence, "what I believe it will be." And remember, the Declaration is the document of which Jefferson was most proud, the thing that he did that he was most proud. The signal of arousing men to burst the chains under which monkish ignorance and superstition had persuaded them to bind themselves. All eyes are opened or opening to the rights of man. The general spread of the light of science has already laid open to every view the palpable truth that the mass of mankind has been born with saddles on their backs, has not been born with saddles on their backs, nor a favored few booted and spurred, ready to ride them legitimately by the grace of God. Here, Jefferson explains that the light of science, knowledge of the palpable truth, has enlightened human beings to understand that there is no natural or divine entitlement of the one or the few to govern the many without their consent. the Enlightenment or light of science may not be fully clear or available to all on a theoretical level. Not all of us study the ideas that inform the Declaration of Independence every day. But I would argue that Jefferson's statement of it in the Declaration makes it accessible to all on a rhetorical level, which is in fact the genius of the Declaration of Independence. To support these two explanations, I would add a third, also from Jefferson. At the beginning of the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom, a document also drafted by Thomas Jefferson, another document of which he was very proud, subsequent to the Declaration, he writes, quote, "Well aware that the opinions and beliefs of men depend not on their will, but follow involuntarily the evidence proposed to their minds." Before he continues, and he says this before he continues to make the argument that human beings are created with a free mind, altogether insusceptible of restraint. The implication of this opening to Jefferson's argument for free speech, free thought, and free religious belief, freedom of religious belief, is that when human beings are confronted with evidence proposed to their minds, their acceptance of this truth is involuntary. They cannot reject it. One might say it's self-evident. So those, I think, are the three pieces of evidence or explanation that Jefferson gives us for what self-evidence is. It's obvious to all. It becomes known to us in a fuller, higher way when we consult our reason and when we study it. But there's also a sense in which when we're confronted with something that is true, we can't reject it. Our acceptance of it is involuntary. So now to the second point in the Declaration, we can just look at the text again. So we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Again, it seems absolutely obvious. All men are created equal. And to us, it's second nature that we're all created equal. This assertion is entirely second nature to us now. So that when I teach John Locke's Second Treatise of Government to undergraduate students, in which he makes this argument for natural human equality, the students are sort of, okay, yeah. That's like, so what if he wrote it a few hundred years ago? Isn't it what everybody always thought? So the students are always like wondering what the big deal is about it. The fact is, however, that it was an entirely new concept, and its meaning remains to this day controversial. So what does Jefferson mean when he asserts that human beings are created equal? Again, it seems like a self-evident truth, but there's a lot to say about it. Does he mean that we're equal in our natural rights? That we are equal in our natural abilities? This seems obviously not the case. Or that this equality entitles us to equal station and results in life? These are all topics of discussion and dispute and debate when people read and discuss the Declaration, as we always do. In this case, I think I would argue that Jefferson also follows the argument of John Locke in his Second Treatise of Government. And I know that there was a film about, I can't even remember the name of the film, but there was a scene in which someone was trying to get the wife of a congressman to read Tocqueville. And she said, it's not so bad once you stop falling asleep. And I know that, and I love Tocqueville, don't take that the wrong way, but Locke can be like that for students, for undergraduate students, and I imagine for high school students as well, but there are parts of the Second Treatise that I think if you show them to them, they can really illuminate reading the Declaration of Independence. So Jefferson, I think, follows Locke in this closely on the question of equality. In the Second Treatise, Locke sets out to understand political power correctly. His argument is that every individual human being is created or born into a pre-political natural state of freedom, quote, freedom to order their actions and dispose of their possessions and persons as they see fit within the bonds of nature, without asking permission of anyone else. Locke tells us that it is obvious, maybe even self-evident, that all creatures of the same species and rank, promiscuously born to all the advantages of nature. I love that statement, promiscuously born. We're born here and there and everywhere, right? We're just all born to all the advantages of nature, and the use of the same faculties should be equal one amongst another without subordination or subjection. Locke's argument, which clearly informs Jefferson's, is that no one is born with an aristocratic coat of arms emblazoned on his chest or a royal scepter in his hand. No one has a legitimate, pre-existing, divine, or political traditional right to assert authority over us without our consent. It's that simple. We are all created and born into a free and independent state, which makes us subordinate by nature to no one. So I think that's what Jefferson means when he says we're all created equal. We are created equal in our natural state, which gives us the right of self-governance. And we only give up that right with our consent to be governed by somebody else, and we control that consent. That's the heart. We can talk about lots of different, characteristics of equality, but I think that's the heart of what Jefferson means in the Declaration when he's talking about our natural equality, and why it's important for this rhetorical political statement. Okay, the third part of this paragraph, so looking at our Declaration again, nobody really needs to look at it. We all know what it says, right? We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It's amazing how long you could talk for just those few words. But what are natural rights? The big question of the morning. Why are these certain rights fundamental? Why does Jefferson mention the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? Because there are certain rights and these are among those rights, but the implication is that there are other natural rights, of course. Locke spends an entire long chapter on property and our right to possessions being the heart of our being really important. Jefferson replaces that with the pursuit of happiness, but Locke spends a lot of time on the importance of possessions and the protection of our natural right to property as an extension of our bodies, of our person. Whatever we acquire is an extension of who we are, and so that is a natural right as well. What are the other natural rights to which human beings are entitled, and what does it mean to say that they are unalienable? So let's talk about all of those different parts. Natural rights, first of all. We should begin by addressing the natural rights the Declaration tells us we do have. The Declaration asserts explicitly that we have certain inalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Again, as I said, the implication is that we possess other inalienable rights, but in this assertion of principle in the Declaration, it doesn't really explicate further what those other rights are that we possess. As I said, Locke spends a lot of time on property, and Locke and Jefferson will also add the right to revolution. The right to revolution seems to be one of our natural rights that Jefferson will turn to next, or not quite next, but in the same paragraph at the end, and of course then at the end of the Declaration again. And he's already mentioned it in his introduction. And that right to revolution is the right to withdraw our consent to a government that's no longer serving the purpose for which we established it, and to set up another new government. The natural unalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness are are these pre-political natural rights, along with our natural equality, that precede the establishment of political society and government. And of course, the laws that we enact through the government, through this government. Locke says, again referring to Locke, because Locke sort of gives us more words. He's a philosopher, he has all the words that are behind some of Jefferson's ideas. Locke says that we have these rights in our natural state, in a state of nature, where we are governed by a natural law that we know when we consult our reason rather than our passions. In this natural state, Locke asserts that with all human beings, quote, being equal and independent, no one ought to harm another in his life, health, liberty, or possessions. The Declaration is a political document, not a philosophic treatise. It has a theoretical paragraph, the one we're discussing, but it doesn't have a lot of time and a lot of space to provide these philosophic explications. So it doesn't actually say much more about the origin of these rights. The natural quality of the rights suggests to us that they're not from a divine source, except Jefferson does say that we're all created equal. What does that mean, that we're all created equal? He doesn't say. He doesn't provide the explanation for it. But it doesn't seem to be. He's not looking for, and he doesn't provide a biblical account of those rights. They don't seem. He doesn't provide it. Locke will say in the second treatise that human beings are all the work of one wise maker, but Jefferson doesn't explicitly explain that, and he just puts it out there for us to discuss for the next 250 years. These natural, and so I leave it for our discussion after, for us to consider what he might mean by that. Then arises the question of what it means to say that these rights are unalienable. What does that mean? These rights essentially are unalienable because no one can usurp them, no one can seize them from us, and we also can't give them up permanently. In fact, we never give them up. We never give them up entirely at all. And Jefferson insists that we do not and cannot alienate or give up these rights even once we enter into a political or civil society. We transfer only enough power to the government to which we consent to make our rights secure and protected. That is, we never relinquish our natural rights, and we only transfer what Locke calls our natural legislative power informed by the law of nature and our natural executive power provisionally to the political society we establish to protect our unalienable rights. That is, we retain those rights always. We never give them up, and we only give up as much power as we have to secure those rights. Those rights are ours. They're part of who we are. We can't give them up, even if we wanted to. It would be like giving up your arm. You don't give them up. They're as natural to you as your nose. Finally, Jefferson turns to the purpose at hand, you could say. After we hold these truths to be self-evident, and that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by the Creator with certain unalienable rights, and among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And then he tells us that that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. So what does that mean? Again, Jefferson sort of just tells us that we set up governments to secure these rights. So essentially here, he is telling us that we create a government in order to secure our rights. But what happens when that government starts to become destructive of those rights? Jefferson begins this is where Jefferson offers to us his explanation of what the Americans are doing at this very moment. He says that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its power in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. So this is how Jefferson begins his explanation of the right to revolution. That is, any government, when any form of government becomes destructive of the ends for which it was created, we have a right to abolish that government or to separate from that government and to institute a new government that serves the purpose for which the government was created in the first place. This statement is an explanation that brings us full circle, in a way, already to the introduction. That is, we're coming back to that introductory statement of why the United Colonies, they're not quite states yet, the United Colonies are separating from Great Britain. And this is where we see the syllogism of this part of the Declaration start to come into focus. If or since all men are created equal and have natural rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, among other natural inalienable rights, then there must also be a right to revoke consent to a government that has become destructive and hostile to those rights. And next, the Declaration anticipates, so we know that we have a right to withdraw our consent. That's part of our natural rights. Next, and this is the part that I'm going to focus on now, the Declaration anticipates objections. If you give the people a right to revolution, aren't they going to be rebelling all the time? Aren't they going to be in the streets trying to overthrow the government every single day? And again, this is another one of those great models for student writing. You always have to anticipate the objections to your argument, and that's what Locke does. Again, Jefferson is following Locke here. These words are practically selected directly from Locke's second treatise of government. That is that that the Declaration insists on the general principles that governments are hardly ever changed, and that nor should they be changed for light and transient causes. But the fact is that, and the fact is that they hardly ever are. We hardly ever change. We hardly ever absolutely overthrow our governments. In fact, people will put up with a lot from their rulers before they're done. Instead, it turns out that we, as Jefferson says, we're more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to change governments. But after a long, repeated train of abuses and usurpations that demonstrate the government is tending towards an absolute despotism, the Declaration asserts that it is not only the right of the people, but also their duty to throw off the government and establish a better one. And I think it's really interesting for us to pause just for a moment there, because the fact is the Declaration talks a lot about our natural rights, but this is the first time that it imposes a duty on us. We have a duty of revolution. We have a duty to withdraw our consent to a government that's destructive of the end of protecting the natural rights with which we've entrusted it. That's a different words, different language, and it shows us how important the right to revolution is. We have a duty to throw off the government and establish a better one. Finally, the Declaration makes its way full circle to the introduction. The American colonies are in this very place, finally at this point. They have tolerated repeated injuries and deprivations of their natural rights under King George III and the Parliament, all showing the intention to assert absolute power over the colonies without respect for their natural rights. The only rightful thing for the Americans to do is to dissolve the bands which connected them. This is the argument with which he began with Great Britain, and assume a separate and independent status under the laws of nature and all nations. This is the assertion, the Declaration of Independence. What follows next, and I'm not going to read the entire list of grievances or nor do we have time to explain all of them. But what follows next is the evidence, right? Is a list of evidence, a list of the grievances which comprise the evidence the American colonies present to, quote, a candid world to judge for themselves whether the British have abused their trust, whether the British government has in fact abused its power and its trust. It is important to recall that the American colonies had, as Wilfred Maclay explains in his text Land of Hope, benefited from a long policy of benign neglect by the British. Maclay explains that the British kind of sent over colonies and left them for a very long time to their own devices, and that developed a strong sense of independence and of course, innovation. If nobody is telling you how to govern yourselves, you start to try to figure out how to govern yourselves on your own. The British had not given much thought to the organization and governance of the British colonies until after the 7 Years' War with France, which was basically 1754 to 1763. The British were successful in pursuing and defeating the French in North America, but the result was a debt crisis, about 58 million pounds, and you know where this is going, that burdened the British economy and induced the Parliament, the British Parliament, to begin to tax the British citizens of the colonies for the first time. All of that said, the grievances against the king are a litany of actions depriving the colonies of representation and good government, the exercise of their rights to justice in a court of law, protection by, but also civilian control of the military, the proper representation in legislative bodies selected by a free people to govern them and to protect their rights and ensure their safety and prosperity. Of course, deprivation of the right to representation when Britain was now taxing them. And so this, I think, leaves us with the conclusion that Jefferson returns to at the end of the Declaration before listing all of those who actually wrote and all of those who signed the Declaration on July 4th. And it leaves us with the conclusion, and you'll forgive me this popular reference, but it leaves us with the conclusion, as Taylor Swift would say today, we are never getting back together like ever. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor McNamara. We do have to remedy one thing. You now have the correct version of a pocket constitution from the Center for Constitutional Studies. Thank you so much. What we're going to do is invite you to remain on stage.
Okay.
We have a little bit of time for a number of questions. And so I'd love to, I'll kind of act as a moderator calling on folks.
Sure.
We don't have another mic right now. And so for now, at least, I'd ask that you just...
These are teachers. They know how to project.
You know how to project, right? You've got the vocal skills. Your mother told you to use your inside voice regularly, as mine did. So please, if you have a question for Professor McNamara, we can please stand, give your question. That'd be great. Thank you.
Okay, you said something at the beginning about how other nations had broken away from a parent country before, that none of them had ever used it. Who broke away before the United States?
Well, I mean, countries are always sort of breaking away and forming new nations. There's a long. I can't even give you a sort of exact set of examples, but the difference here. I mean, countries, empires break up. They break away. Look at the Athenian Empire. There are always rebellions. There are always city-states or within the Athenian Empire trying to break away. If you read Thucydides, for example, just to provide one example. But the United States is the first country to issue a Declaration of Independence based on a theoretical set of principles for the whole world to provide, first of all, to alert the whole world, to tell the whole world what they're doing, but also to tell the world why they're doing it, the list of grievances, but also to set a new standard for the whole world, right? This is a brand new standard. You too can declare independence based on the rights of man. There are tyrannies and absolute monarchies claiming divine right to rule over human beings by divine right all over Europe. In particular, certainly, I mean, divine right is a particularly sort of European concept, but there are lots practicing it in other places. The United States is the first to issue this sort of theoretical, practical, rhetorical document for the whole world, for a candid world to see, to read, to contemplate, and to know why they're doing what they're doing.
A question over here. Sorry.
Okay, there, thank you. I was about to say I can't see you.
I remember hearing years ago that Thomas Jefferson, when he put life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, in his view, if you were owning property and like gaining property, that meant that you were pursuing happiness. Do you have any enlightenment on that in your explanation?
Right. Jefferson wanted to provide a broader statement. He didn't want to narrow it just to, I mean, he does, you're right, like having property is the means to the pursuit of happiness, right? Being able to sort of pursue your well-being, your health, all of those things I think are encompassed in this idea of the pursuit of happiness. So he's broadening the purpose of and including in the pursuit of happiness this broader concept. It's also a more elevated concept than the pursuit of property per se. And even Locke says the pursuit of health and possessions. So he has a broader concept, although he spends a lot of time on how important property is to individual rights and freedom in a society.
Other questions? We have time for a few more. Please, back here.
So the long train of abuses and usurpations, as I read through that, I get a little tiny bit of insight, but can you recommend some resources that really explore how bad King George III was? How bad the tyranny was? I don't think our generation, our children, the grandchildren don't understand what that is.
Yeah, I think that a good history of the American colony. I'm not a historian, so I can find things, and if you give me a card, I can send them to you. I don't really have a ready list right now, but I think that you're right that it's important for them to see, like any good American sort of history of that pre-revolutionary period is going to explain this whole sort of list of grievances that you can, I mean, Jeff Rosen is going to be talking this afternoon. He's got a new book about the revolutionary era as well and the founding era. There's so many that it's even hard to just focus on one of them. But thank you. Yeah.
Please.
I appreciate you coming today. You phrased it in a way that I've never thought of before. Would it be incorrect to say that Jefferson viewed this as a worldwide document and not an American document?
Well, I would say that he saw this as, I mean, as I said, he says that this is an expression of the American mind. So it is particular to the American mind at the moment, but it's an expression of the American mind that's applicable to mankind. That it's an assertion of universal principles and universal natural rights. This applies to all mankind, all men, all human beings, you get in the Jefferson mode and you say men, that all human beings have are created equal and are born with these natural rights. And it applies to everyone, everywhere, even though it's a current or contemporary expression of the American mind, there's an effort to assert this principle in a way that it applies everywhere. And so is Jefferson ambitious to have a kind of universal imprint on not just the politics of his day, but the politics of the future? I think so. And I think that's what Lincoln is reiterating as well at the Gettysburg Address. He says, let's not let the government of the people, for the people, perish from this earth. So Lincoln is reiterating Jefferson's purpose to create a model of government based on the natural, as opposed to sort of traditional, political practice in the world. Let's not let this experiment in free Republican government perish from the earth. And so it's a continuation of Jefferson's project. So it's as I sort of tried to make clear, Jefferson operates on different levels.
Okay. Well, thank you. Please join me again in thanking Professor McNamara.
Thank you.